Okay. I'll get started and people can come in as they arrive. My name is Julie Strauss. I'm a senior program manager on the analysis services team. I am predominantly focusing on BI, business intelligence. I've been with Microsoft for 10 years in all kinds of different positions, from technical support to marketing, and now I'm on the product team. And I've heard that you have heard a lot about PowerPivot. Yes? No? Yes. So all the excitement building up for the Friday afternoon, that's why you look so excited. So how many of you have actually seen PowerPivot? Some. How many of you have actually been working with PowerPivot? Some. Nice. Can you actually hear me? Yeah? So I have no slides. I have lots of demos. I could probably be up here for days because we think it's super exciting technology, like all of the presenters probably. What I plan to do is first do a short, maybe 15-minute demo overview of what PowerPivot is, where it fits in, what are the core scenarios. This is typically kind of the typical demos we do of business case. Then, in addition to that, I got a data set from Steve for some research data, some well information that I plan to, and I'm no researcher, so I'm really running the risk of looking utterly stupid up here, so I may need your help for what I'm actually looking for. But the plan for that was to take a data set that I hardly even know, start from scratch, and what would it actually take to build a BI model from scratch, and what is the kind of analysis that you can enable with PowerPivot. Sounds good? Okay. And if we have more time, I can go back and do more different stuff. So, and please do feel free, this hours is yours. So if I'm showing something you've seen, something that's not relevant, if you have questions, just interrupt and we'll take it from there. Okay? Paul, are you tired or are you quiet? Both. Okay, now I will project. If I can. Maybe I can't. I can. So PowerPivot is an add-in to Excel. It was designed, it comes from the analysis. Are you familiar with analysis services?
Raise your hand if you do.
Huh? Some?
I'm asking them to raise hand.
To raise, yeah, would be a good idea. Can you please raise your hand? How many of you know analysis services? No. So analysis services is basically works as a BI semantic model. So you take data from multiple data sources, you mash it all up, you build a semantic model that you host on a server, and you have different client pieces connecting to that. The model is typically built by a BI professional, an IT professional, that go and collect requirements for all the end users for what they want to analyze, and they build it out. It can be a project that takes everything from a couple of months to years. What we've done with PowerPivot is saying there's a lot of data that sits in data warehouses, and there's a lot of data that sits on each desktop. And what happens today is when you have all these reports, analysis, etc., from a central location, a lot of users will take this data, but they want to add something, want to add a column, want to add their own business logic to it. And what happens is they dump it all out in Excel, and now you have this separate report living out there that is not necessarily backed up, it's hard to track, etc. So the whole idea for PowerPivot was to acknowledge the fact that Excel is the most commonly BI tool. And it is hard for IT to track and manage and figure out what's going on. It's hard to maintain. So what we allow here in short with PowerPivot is for an Excel user, a user that is not necessarily an IT pro, they don't know that they're building a model, but we enable users to build analysis on the fly. What they essentially are doing in the back end is building a model. That means that there's a lot of concepts such as building relationships, data type, inside data modeling that we have to kind of embed into the analysis, exposing users gradually, so you don't have to be an expert, but you can still build valuable analysis. So that's kind of the background for PowerPivot. So I'll take you through some of that now. So in this first example, it's a typical kind of sales data warehouse demo where I'm working for an online movie company like Netflix, whatever, where you sell movies online. Customers can log on, purchase movies, and download them and watch them, right? All that data is in a sales data warehouse. But what I want to know is how am my sales doing according to, for example, industry trends? And what is industry trends? That is data that live on the internet. It's how other companies are doing. It's how competition is doing. It's how the box office is doing. So the challenge, it's a pretty fundamental question. How am I doing compared to competition? But it's actually pretty hard to do from a technology standpoint today because the data are in different sources. So let me go ahead and walk through that scenario, show some features, and we will go back after that. So I'm in Excel 2010, which is a prerequisite for using PowerPivot. PowerPivot is an add-in. There's two pieces to PowerPivot. There's an add-in for Excel, which is a free download. You can go to powerpivot.com, download it, and use it with Excel 2010. So all of the analysis that I'm showing, you can do as long as you have Excel 2010. Then there's a server piece that's saying, once I've built my analysis and I want to potentially share it with other people, I want to schedule data refresh, then you can upload it to the server into SharePoint, where now this solution becomes visible to IT. For that, you need analysis services, which is embedded into SharePoint. So first thing I want to go and do is pull in some data. I've cheated a little bit, so I have loaded a few tables from my data warehouse. And you would think, well, actually the hardest thing normally for start building a model is to get the data in. So I picked the easy route out. You don't have to see how complex it really is. But it's really not that complex. So I'll run you through one. So one of the core tenets of PowerPivot is being able to take data from multiple different sources and mash it up, right? So support for many different data sources is a key point. So here we have just surfaced some of them. And we put a lot of emphasis into the getting started, introducing concepts as the user gets started. So if I had no tables in here, only this getting external data would be the only controls that are active. So it kind of just guides the user. That's the first thing you have to go do is bring data in. So we support a variety of data sources. So obviously SQL, SQL Azure, Access, Oracle, Teradata, DB2, flat files like Excel and CSV, etc. Obviously coming from the SQL team, we love showing SQL, so I'll show that. And the idea here is, let me just connect to a server. I just have a local machine here with my data warehouse. Now I have two ways of getting data in here. Either I can write my own SQL query. We have a graphical query designer that I can use. Obviously not very Excel user friendly. Most of the users wouldn't know how to do it. So I will pick the easy way out. And I will just pick from a list of tables. Now what happens here is we'll just display a list of all the tables that exist in this data warehouse. So I'll pick sales and related tables. Related tables, it scans the back end, see if there's already some relationships defined. It will pull in that so I make sure I have a data set that actually makes sense for me to work with. And I will add, I actually already have data in here, so I don't really have to do this. I'll just pull one in as an example. Let me just clear it. Let's pick date, for example. Now, normally you don't want to pull all the data in that is here, right? You want to do a filter. That's, again, where you typically write a SQL query. I don't know potentially how to do that. So we have enabled here what is basically mimicking a Excel table. So I can choose my granularity now for rows and columns. I can say the column granularity, I don't want to see Spanish. My Spanish is very bad, so there's no need for me to see that. French is not impressive either. So I can go ahead and select and deselect the data that I don't want to. Obviously, I can go ahead and change my my row granularity as well. So I can say I don't want to see data from 2005. So all I'm doing is filtering my data, right? Pretty simple. And I can say, okay, whenever I reach a state for the data I want to have, I can go ahead and click Finish. So this is pretty easy, right? Obviously, if I want, we are writing a SQL query in the back end. So if I want to, once the table get in, see each table is represented in here, I can go to my table properties. First, I can obviously go now and add more data, a filter, etc., and refresh. I can also go into the query editor. This is the SQL we generated. So we're not necessarily hiding anything. We're just surfacing the most intuitive, easy to use way up front, so people can choose which route they want to take. So, so that's one way. So now I have all my sales data in here. Now I'm ready to go ahead and do my analysis. But so far, in theory, I've only pulled data from one data source. So this is not really that special from kind of any other BI tool, right? It's still pulling from one source. So what I want to do now is go and have a look at the industry trends that I talked about. So here, I have gone to the internet. I've purchased some data of movies from the box office. I just put it into Excel. I could have copy-pasted from the web as well. So I can now just highlight all of this, say copy. Would be pretty neat if I could just paste it in there, right? If it was only that easy. It is. So as soon as I have data on the clipboard, I get a paste control enabled. And I'll just paste it in. I see a preview of my data. I can call this my box office and say, OK. That's pretty simple. Huh? Try and do that in any other BI tool. It's pretty complex. So now what I can do, as an Excel user, what I want to go do is start going to analyze my data. Now, I know that, in theory, for this to work, I need to have this somewhat linked. I need to have some relationships to the other data in order for the analysis to work at all. As an Excel user, I don't necessarily know that. And even if I know it, I may not know how to do it. So this is one of the areas where we're trying to take the complexity out. So all I want to do when I've mashed up the data that I have in here is start go and do some analysis. We have some predefined templates in here that lets you start. I've just cheated a little bit to get started out here. So all I do is insert a pivot table. And this is basically the window into the data that I have in my modeling window. Make sense? Any questions? You asleep? Yes. Okay. So this is my window. So now what I want to go do is start doing some analysis. Let's say I want to analyze by genre. So have in mind these are all movie sales. And for my purchase, I can see I want to analyze the purchase count. So the number of movies that customers have purchased. Let me just zoom in a little bit. There you go. This, again, is all from my data warehouse, so it's still not very special. What I want to do now is add my box office sale that I pasted in there from Excel. And here I'm going to paste tickets sold. There you go. Right? It's broken. Right? All the numbers are the same. Obviously, they're not the same. So why is it broken? Well, we know it's because I don't have any relationship defined, but I do not necessarily know that if I'm not a technical person. So what I see over here, though, is that there's a notification telling me that a relationship may be needed. At this point, I'm stuck in my analysis. I've wrote my pivot table. I have nothing to lose, so I'll go ahead and create it. Now what happens is a two-step process. We go through that data set in the back end, scan all the data, and we're looking for data type, number of unknowns. We do a whole lot of analysis. This is actually an algorithm that was developed by Microsoft Research that they have been working with for a long time that we embedded. And if the algorithm detects any joins between that box office table and my other tables in there, it will go ahead and immediately create the relationship. So this is telling me which relationship was created. Now pay attention to the numbers over here as I click close. Magic. Not magic at all, I can see. Okay. What happens here is an attempt to educate the user. This algorithm is very, very conservative. We are not detecting all relationships, and that's not the purpose either. The purpose is very simple cases to show the user that when you've matched up data and your pivot table is broken, a relationship is likely needed. So we've been sitting with customers as we develop the code, have them go and play with it. Now they come into a situation where it's a little bit more complex. We can't actually detect, we still detect that a relationship is needed, but if we are in doubt on which path to go, so we potentially could get it wrong, we don't create anything. So we kind of leave the user there. But because they have seen the cause of effect of not having one, we've seen users then go back into the data set, start looking for the cardinalities, and actually figuring out how to create relationship. So the point here is education. It's not detecting everything we can. So with that in place, this was actually how easy it was to take data from my desktop and mash it up with sales from my data warehouse. Now, as an Excel user, you will then obviously start building out. We will add slices. Are you familiar with slices? Excel 2010? Some of you are. Slices are basically what we think of as visual filters laid out on the surface. So let's say I want to add, let's say month name. Let's add month to the slicer host, and let's add year. There you go. So now I see all the different years that are here. It makes it very easy for me to see what I'm not seeing or what I actually am seeing. This was a feature that we felt from an analysis perspective. What happens now is I can upload this to SharePoint and render this thing in SharePoint, meaning all the users that doesn't have Excel 2010 can still interact with this analysis. They can use the slices to navigate the data, but they can't also access the back end. So by having these slices laid out on the surface, we're trying to add some interactivity. The Excel team didn't have time to do it. We really wanted it. So we shipped a handful of developers and testers to the Excel team for 6 months, and they collaborated and worked with this. So these slices actually ship as part of Excel, but in a little bit different format. But that was kind of the way we were able to get those in here. So again, these can obviously be manipulated and changed so they can look nice and whatever you want to do. So there you go. So once I'm ready to start sharing this, say now I'm ready to share this with other people, I can go up here, I can say save and send, and I can save to SharePoint. And here I can upload to the PowerPivot gallery. I'm actually not going to do that, and I'll tell you in a second why. But what I can do here is upload into a gallery that I will show you, which is basically a preview of all the different pieces of analysis that the users are doing. One reason I'm not going to upload this, and one reason why I cheated and had preloaded the data sets, is the data volumes. So I'm working in Excel. As you may or may not know, Excel has a limitation for how many rows you can work with. And I don't know if you have hit it. Some users do. That is another reason why we have a separate window. So if I go to my purchase table, if you look down here, actually there's a little defect, but there's actually 100 million rows in this table. You can't see that. But there's actually 100 million rows in here. And the point is not necessarily that there's a lot of data. It's how interactive it still is despite of the data volume. So if I go here and sort, for example, on currency, there you go. You see that? That's 100 million rows sorted on the fly. So the idea is not that you have to work with big data volumes. The pieces you can, and because if you were a professional working on a real model, you've planned out everything. You know how to create your model. You know what you're doing. But as an Excel user, I don't know what I'm necessarily doing. I'm playing around with the data, and I can't afford to sit and wait 15 minutes for 100 million rows to sort and filter. So the point is just that we enable it. Doesn't mean that every user will actually have a requirement, but you have the option. So let me just go ahead and load the gallery. Any questions so far? Yes.
I know that for the PowerPivot, the underlying technology it's using is a vertical database storage solution, right? How does it get implemented in here? Vertica table storage solution in here, because that's how the indexing or the ordering is very fast, because it goes by columnar instead of the row-wise regular database, how it happens.
So what we have done, so it's a VertiPack engine. It's a new engine of analysis services. Think of it as a different storage mode. So it's a column-based storage mode, which means that if you look at different kind of rows, you don't have any similarities, so it's hard to compress the data. But if you look at columns, depending on what data types they are, but let's say you have, if you're looking at a demographic data and you say people with the number of kids, right? There's a lot of them that will have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, but there's not so much above that, meaning we can very easily compress the data into these columns, which can kind of improve both the size as well as the performance. So we have up to these 100 million rows is actually a pretty small file. This is my desktop. This is the desktop I do my email on. So because of that compression, we make it very easy to work with. And that data file, that entire data file, is stored inside the Excel workbook. So what happens when I upload it to the server is as soon as the first user query that pivot table, we retrieve the data file out of the Excel workbook and restore that data file on Analysis Services, which is now managing that solution.
Coming to the same point.
When we post onto the SharePoint actually stores the database into the PowerPivot service. But when we post on it, it always asks for security. We cannot get into this access to this PowerPivot without providing the security onto the SharePoint dashboard. Is it something that is still mandatory with the new versions, or?
Oh, that you have to provide a...
Yes. There is no anonymous access for the pivot gallery.
The reason for that is that for a lot of these back-end data sources, there is security onto it, right? What happens is the second I upload, I logged onto my data warehouse and I pull the data in. I pull 100 million rows in. By the time I pull that in, it's part of my Excel workbook. The credentials I had to use to log onto my sales data warehouse, they're no longer filtered, right? So I could give the workbook to you and you can now see it.
But you can
impersonate the user authentication through a pivot service. Still asks for a user ID password in spite of you impersonating the user ID password at the data source level. Because for the data sources, it takes authentication from the pivot service.
Yes, but you can store those, though.
And we store it in a secure store, and then we use the impersonation. Still, it is asking for a user ID password on the front end. It doesn't allow the anonymous access. We can offline, we can do that.
Yeah.
And one more question I have is, can we create a SQL analysis cubes from here, like a reverse engineering? You have all these things set up. Can we create a cube and then host it on NSAS?
No, you cannot. What you can do, you can go the other way. So you can connect to Analysis Services, get it into here. And I've been told you're all under NDA, so I don't have to tell you when you leave the room what I'm telling you now. But for the next version, what we will actually do is take this VertiPack mode and enable that on the server. So now all our development environment here is Excel. Moving forward, we will move that into Visual Studio, meaning you can actually move workbooks. That obviously means you can deploy these to a server as well. You can actually take the file out of the Excel and restore it, but you can't take it into the multi-dimensional world of it, if that's what you're asking. But you will be able to move these files, which we think of as a personally developed workbook, deploy it, take it into a professional environment, deploy it, and manage that as a corporate BI solution.
The reason why I'm asking is like power user or analyst who spends a lot of time in creating the MDX functionalities and all these functionalities that he thinks are relevant for his domain and all these data sources, But now he wants to have this imported into the cube, and then it can be refreshed automatically, and also it can be used instead of being a prototyping functionality which he uses as a Power Pivot. So that's the reason I'm asking, like, if that is a possibility that can be done by just creating the XML, like that's what is required for SSAS, right? So if it can create the XML document behind the scenes, then it should be pretty easy for them to manage going forward. They don't have to worry about the loss of their whatever the work they have done.
So, but what is the purpose, though? Like, your end goal is that?
The end goal is they have prototyped the solution on their own desktop.
Yes.
But now they give it out to the IT people to manage it behind the scenes so that they can utilize these resources that they have already done and then work on the next one, which currently they can't do it.
No.
Yeah. So
that is exactly what we're enabling for the next release. What we're enabling is not to... So think of VertiPack as just a different storage mode. So what we will be enabling is for a user to build this, exactly what you're saying. Take the scenario where you're taking this workbook is built by a user who has the domain expertise. So they create all the right calculations, they know what they want to see. Now you can give this workbook to IT because you're not in the business of managing this data, right? So now you can take this workbook to IT and they can restore that on the server, maintaining all the business logic. They can hook up the right data sources, etc.
One more thing is like
the best practices that you have in SSAS for the time intelligence and all this stuff, will that be available for the Power Pivot too, where they can, using a date functionality that is available in individual sources, can they just say, okay, use the time intelligence and get all these things created?
Not exactly. Some of the features will be there. We're working on getting on par, but it's not the exact same that we're migrating. We're building them from scratch. So some of them you will see carried over. Some of them will probably be in the next release. But that is definitely the goal, to be on par with that and enable same functionality. Okay? So, yeah, now that I have uploaded this workbook, this is how they appear in this gallery. So each of these rows represents a workbook that a user have built and uploaded into here. So what happens the second I upload it into here is two things. I upload it. It's now part of SharePoint. It's backed up. It's secured. It's secure as any file on SharePoint. So I don't have to maintain it anymore. I can set up a refresh schedule. So I can decide for each of the different data sources how frequently should they be refreshed, and it's set up to be automatic. But in addition to that, because this now lives on analysis services, I can take a blank Excel workbook and connect to that model I've built and start doing my own analysis. So I'm basically sharing that model. So that's the continue working on the same workbook scenario. More importantly, what happens is if you are in a shared infrastructure environment, what happens is, and I've been disconnected for the service because we're not allowed to show it, and I've done it. So now they have pulled me off it, but let me just show you. What happens is, as part of SharePoint, we have what we call the management dashboard. The management dashboard is IT's view into all of these different solutions. So if you look here, for each of these bubbles represents one of those workbooks. So the second a user uploads it, it becomes visible for IT. So instead of being an Excel workbook living on my desktop, it's now visible to IT. So I can see the size of it. This one you can actually play back, so you can see the growth over time. Because this, to your point, these are also very often used as prototypes, tools where you can quickly go and do analysis. They typically, if you compare to a semantic model built in a pro environment that lives for years and years, a lot of these solutions follow a project cycle. So you can see these bubbles, they may go up. One may live for a week, one for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 months. Some of them just keep growing. Some of them are just going up and down, up and down. All the ones that just go through shorter cycles, IT doesn't necessarily care about. They're not mission critical. But you have a guy like this one that can just keep growing and growing. And from it was something I developed and intended to share with 5 people. Suddenly this can be a full-blown model that we have 200 users accessing. When you see that from an IT perspective, you're saying, okay, this is probably something we should look into, potentially build a valid a model around it. We should take it over and manage it. In addition, for each of these, it's actually a PowerPivot model that is the back end for this. So you can go and access a lot of information and do analysis on the usage. So you can track for each of the workbooks who are accessing it, who created it, which are the type of data sources. You can trace back and identify which data sources has been used. So that is kind of the end-to-end flow of PowerPivot. Any other questions? No? Okay. So what I did plan to do was now take the data set that I got from Steve and say, just go from scratch and build a model. What does it actually take? And this is data from online, from the internet. It's not clean data. Obviously, a lot of what I'm showing here is data that is carefully prepared, etc. So the next section would be going from a flat file. How would you actually use PowerPivot, and what kind of analysis can you do with it? Make sense? Any objections? No? Okay. So, and this is the part where I am definitely outside my areas of expertise. So I may need help from you guys. So let me just start with this one, actually.
So I already prepared. In the beginning, I told them that I'm a matchmaker. I'm trying to match technologies with the scenarios in science.
Okay.
And so they don't have the expertise that you have, and we don't necessarily know anything better about the environment. So go ahead. And Steve can help out if there's any. Right.
Well, now you're part of it. No.
You're my example of in this marriage I'm trying to make, right? So let's see how that's going to go.
Okay. So what I went out, I got this link. Now it actually shut down all my internet sites. So let me just go out here. So obviously knowing that you have probably already seen a lot about stock market, sales, and HR for the last 2 days, that is not necessarily all that relevant to you. When Jan asked me, can you use some of our data sets? I'm like, of course. That's until you're sitting with it and realize you have no clue what the data is talking about. But anyway, I went out to this DRI site and pulled a data set. It's a very simple data set, and the reason I didn't start with this is this will kind of guide you through from when you're taking raw data from the internet, what are the steps you actually can go through, what does it take to build something from scratch. But it doesn't necessarily surface all the features in the same way. So I went out here and pulled the data in. All that it actually was in here is I just pulled it into, it's in Excel. So I have, it's looking at groundwater. And you can laugh when I say silly stuff and obviously no clue what I'm talking about. So it's looking at wells through 3 provinces in Canada. So I have the well information, the province, the formation, aquifer, etc. I'll go through that. You'll see it as you get in. Now, this is one flat file or one table in here. I can select all and just copy and paste it into PowerPivot. We already saw that in the other demo. So let's go in here, and I'll call this one results. Now, I can actually start doing my analysis and do nothing else. I can start building my pivot table just off one file. I'm going to go a little bit further, not necessarily because it's needed for this scenario, because I could just do with one table. Like you can build a pivot table off one table. I want to kind of start building a model in the anticipation that I may want to mash it up with other data later on. So I want to get to the state where I can analyze, for example, number of wells by province, by formation, by lithology, right? So I want to build that model rather than just having a flat file, because that's really the strength of PowerPivot, not necessarily for what we are getting at today. So what I did to get to that stage is really, I went out here, and I have cheated with some of that. I took, for example, what I did to accomplish it was to go and take each of the columns. For example, here I have the provinces, right? but there's more than one. What I need is my fact table, which is all the results in the wells, and I need to have a lookup table that when I say number of sales or number of wells, I want to analyze by, for example, each of my provinces. It needs to look that up. That's basically the infrastructure for building the model. So I just took these out in a separate file. All I did was go to my data tab, and I removed duplicates using this function, and I'll end up with each only unique rows, which is kind of how I would go. And I will do that for the dimensions I need in here, right? So I've already done that, so I went through that exercise. So let me just go ahead. So here I have all the different kind of dimensions that I can think of that I would potentially like to analyze by, right? So now I can just say select all, and this would be, whoops, a little bit tedious, but that is what it will be. Oh, hold on a second. It didn't grab everything. Let me just go up. There you go. Copy, paste it in. And I'll now go and do this for all of these. But have in mind, it's actually doing all this from scratch. So thinking about it, you're building a model that's pretty easily done anyway. So I'll just pull in a few more dimensions in here, and we can start building information. There you go, all of these, and paste it in. So obviously, this is all copy-paste work. This could have been coming from flat files, from relational data sources. And did you see the integration into Data Market yesterday? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Because that's obviously another area where we have spent a lot of time, because it's very, in the core case for PowerPivot, where you say you take corporate data or clean data and mash it up with personal information. Data Market is really a good source for that. It's weather information, it's statistical information that doesn't live in kind of the corporate data sources, but that really makes the difference for your analysis. So let me just go ahead, paste in a few more, and we're good to go. I actually need depth as well. So looking at apparently the depth of each of the wells, which I'll do some analysis on. Date is always good to have. I'll just go, oops, cancel, not what I want. That would be very nice. That would indeed be very nice. So
some of the third-party tools does that.
Yes. And we are, let me just go, one more thing that I would like to show is, for example, this is just copy-paste. Obviously, as your data grow, you can append more data as well and replace existing data. But here is another way of getting data in. If it keeps changing all the time, I will format this as a table. Control-T, say it has headers. There you go. I'll go in here and I'll create a linked table. What this basically means is it's creating a mirror of that table in Excel in my PowerPivot modeling window. So you can now see, I should actually, if I given it a name in Excel, it would have picked that up. And province, there you go. So, and you can see it's marked with a little link. The reason it's linked is because this table is special. What is special about it, I can go out here, I can navigate back to that Excel table. Let's say I only have the short names here, but let's say I actually wanted to add the full names. I'll just go in here, add it to that table, and as soon as I swap back, we automatically detect the changes in the table and refresh the data. So think of these for scenarios where, think if you have budgeting data that changes all the time, where you don't want to keep copy-pasting. Now it's just maintained live. Every time you do a change, whenever it's in a table you do a change. It's not every time you do a table in Excel, a change in Excel, it's every time you do it in a table. Then we kind of go in and automatically maintain that link. So with that, actually I just need this one as well, diameter. So now, with all of these tables in here, I would start doing my analysis. So you already saw the automatic detection, so that is the route I could go. But I know now I kind of know a little bit about what I'm doing. I know I need to join all of these. I don't want to see that notification pop up every time I add a new piece. So I will be cheating a little bit. Oops, let me just go in here. Let me just go out here. Actually, that's okay. And I have now 2 views, and this is the next version of PowerPivot. So this is super confidential. So I have the data view in here, where I look at all the data. This is where I do a lot of calculations and enrich my data. But what I'm really building, and what I built before, is really a model. So this is the model view of it. This looks pretty pathetic, because I only have a column in each. So let me just go ahead and move this around a little bit. Because now what I want to do is just quickly start creating all of these relationships that I need, instead of waiting for the automatic detection. So what would this take? It will basically take for me to point out to all my dimensions. So I'll go from province, drag and drop to province. There you go. And it will automatically create that relationship. It will, I'll just pick the ones that I really need. So again, this is just a much more efficient way for me of actually doing this. And this is something we added now in the next version that's coming up. And you can see as I select relationships, we highlight the table. So if you have a big model, it's much easier to interact with. I can see if my well water is affected by humans. I can see the depth of the wells. I can see, let me just add a date as well. And we'll see what more is relevant. The status, potentially. Where's status? Or maybe I didn't copy that one in. Let me put, oops, diameter. There you go. And elevation I need as well. If I could see elevation anywhere. There you go. And I create that. Make sense? Yes. So now that I built my model, I will go ahead and do my analysis. So again, I'll go ahead and I will look at 2 charts this time. So let's say in this case, because it's a pretty small data set as well, I want to start my analysis with looking at the count of the wells. So wells is the foundation of my analysis here. So I will add the ID for the wells. And I'll add that to, I can actually add that to both of these. Well ID, there you go. So what are some of the simple questions? First thing, I would like to see how is the well distribution across the different provinces, right? So let me add, I can actually add province name to there, but I can also add it to slicer. So that's pretty simple. Already now, it's easier for me to see now than it was in the Excel table, right? I can see the distribution of how the count of wells in each of the 3 provinces. And I can just start adding for this. So let me just go ahead and build out some of this analysis. Actually, let me add that to the pivot table. Oops, that wasn't. Pick the right one. There you go. Add this one. Now again, there's so much data here that it's pretty hard for me to get a sense for what it is. So as I work with it, I'll just limit it down. I'll say, I only want to see the pieces where I have, let's say, more than 10 counts, right? If there's less than 10 wells, it's not really relevant for me, right? There you go. Makes it a little bit easier to see. And now you can start to do some cross-analysis, and you can see, for Alberta, how does that change the different pieces of lithology that I will actually see across the different regions. Now, it only has 3 regions, so it doesn't say a whole lot, but imagine you had across countries, etc. But this is a very easy way of starting to kind of lay out the information, right? So what else would I want to look at? This is where I'm kind of, where I don't really know. Actually, let me add the aquifer to slices as well. Let me add diameter, depth maybe. Yeah, depth I can add, and maybe elevation like that. Okay, there you go. Or actually, whether it's, didn't I add whether it's affected by humans? It'll be another one. So now you can see how you can start doing your analysis, and I can see, for example, whether the wells are affected by humans. Apparently in Alberta they are much worse than anywhere else. There is, let me just make the slicer hoses a little bit bigger here. There you go. Oh, I have already sliced it by this. They're actually better in Alberta. I don't even know how you pronounce that as an alien. But anyway. What is it? That's really hard. I'm not going to say it. So, does this make any sense? You can kind of start slicing it up. Now, the next piece of analysis, and this is where, why not use Excel? There's some richer functionality that kind of takes a little bit longer to get into. But what you also can see here is, if it has been affected by humans, does that have anything to do with the depth of it? It could be. Looks like it. This is a piece where you dig into this and then want to go find more data and start building out your analysis, right? So it is more as a starting point for getting some ideas to what is actually in here. Another thing you can say that, let's say I want to analyze the impact of, like, does the depth have any impact on anything else, right? I would want to see for the lithology, does that have an impact? But obviously not, and why? Because if I select, there's only two. The granularity, because this is collected, how are the odds that you hit the exact same depth? It's not. So what I want to do with this data is saying, let's say the same counts for diameter. I want to group these into, like, say, 3 buckets so I can start doing more analysis, and then we can go from there. The way I would do that is, inside the PowerPivot window, we have what we call data analytical expression language. So it's basically, it's inherited by Excel. It's copied from the Excel language, but it has much richer functionality. But this is actually a basic functionality that you can do. So I can go and say, for the diameter, I can go here and add another field where I take these and group them. So I'll say equals. I can just point to this column. It's click and point. And I can say, actually, let me just add if, yeah. Hold on a second. If diameter is, let's say, less than or equal to, let's say, 100, then I could just say less than 100. And I'm cheating. I'm always good at cheating. I'll just copy this one and say if it's more than, let's say, 250, then we say it's 250. And anything above that, it's more than 250, right? So pretty basic. That should help. And close the brackets. There you go. And now I can call this diameter intervals, okay? Now I can go back into my analysis. Now I'll see you get a notification that my metadata has changed because I have more values that I can start analyzing on. So I'll refresh this one. And now under diameter, it should show up. There you go. Now I can get rid of this one and pull it out and add the intervals instead. There you go, right? Now I can start seeing if it's less than 100 in diameter, what does that mean to the depth? What does it mean to the lithology, right? So you can start grouping and making it much more relevant, start to make some sense of what the data is. And you can obviously start changing all of this as you go, right? So when you find, and the same I would now go and do for depth. to see what is the correlation between the depth and the diameter and see what is actually what comes out of that, right? So, for example, I found some, I only have 10 minutes left. I found some data on how do people, like accident data, how do people get injured? And it was all kinds of data. And I thought, how could you can't possibly make any sense of that? But there's really patterns. You can see patterns for how people, like going up in ladders in supermarkets. That's number one. Like, how would you know that going shopping, going up a ladder, that's why? Why would you even do that? So it's really interesting how you can use the layout to start modifying the data, enrich the data, and then get more and more insights that kicks off the queue to the next piece of information that you go and collect and enrich. Make sense? So this is basically done in 15, 20 minutes, where you kind of clean up the data. And I could have initially have started doing the analysis, and I did that without even start building my model, just with one piece, one data set, and go slicing and dicing and lay it out and see what it is that I wanted to go clean on and create my calculation. Any questions?
Is there any way that
Hold on.
Sorry about that.
In the roadmap, there is integration between the Pivot Lab and PowerPivot.
The pivot viewer?
Yeah.
It's yes and no. We don't have it on our roadmap for pivot viewer. We have integration with reporting services, which indirectly we also integrate with. So you will get there, but we don't have automatically for pivot viewer on this data set.
Because
this has a capability of handling huge volumes,
Yes.
which Pivot Viewer is restricted to only 5,000.
Yes.
And only the graphical part is different, of course, but still,
Yes.
if we can integrate, then you can have a better record set handling
Yes,
using both.
and what will happen in the next version as well, that we have a whole new graphical representation for reporting services as well, where we have thin slice and dice behavior for reporting, also with a lot of maps, etc. And they integrate with Pivot View as well. But the idea is that our charter as a team is to build the semantic model. In Microsoft today, we have 5 different semantic models. Our charter moving forward, we've had all the teams come together, performance management, analysis services, reporting services. Reporting services have their own model. And we say the analysis services team, their role is to build the model. That's why we are now taking this model and making it available in Visual Studio. So it becomes a more scalable model, scalable in terms of audiences. Then reporting services will be on top of that. It will be their charter to do a lot of that. So we will, without doubt, get there, but it won't hopefully not be done by our team. We want to get away from every team trying to do everything, but try and consolidate what we're good at. So you'll definitely see integration points. We just don't have it on our roadmap at this point.
There was a tool called Freebase's GridWorks that I saw maybe a year ago that was really nice for doing data cleanup and spreadsheets, and it's since been bought by one of your competitors. But I was just curious if you're looking at, I really like what I see, and I'm wondering if you're, as a group between Excel and this product, looking at other tools for doing data cleanup. So one of the things that was really nice in it was you could look for typos. So maybe somebody spells Seattle the wrong way, but somebody else has it right. And in a column, you can just quickly go through it all and make them all one term, which, you know, that kind of functionality. So
I definitely hear what you're saying. It was also part of our roadmap to have that initially. We had it as a third tab in there, data cleansing. We didn't get to it, and we won't get into this release either. The reason we didn't was when we first shipped this V1, I was devastated. I'm like, how can we even ship it without cleansing? It's never going to work. But we have actually not had, we hear what you're saying and see how it's useful, but the number of requests hasn't actually been as high as we...
Make your voice heard.
Yes, exactly. So, and my fear is also, is it just because we're not hearing all the voices, right? So I love, it's definitely relevant for the piece of analysis. Even here, my scenario is simple, so I could use remove duplicates from Excel. But that was just a coincidence that my data happened to be that clean.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with faculty who have multiple people doing data entry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could you pass
I worked with some faculty who had multiple people doing data entry,
Yeah.
and it was through thousands of lines.
Yes.
And to do that cleanup before then they made a relational database out of it or pulled it into Access or something like that. It was really, really time consuming.
Yeah.
So,
No.
that's, and I was at a little Code for Lib meeting where somebody just talked about Freebase at that time, and everybody
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, I could really use that
Yeah.
for doing data cleanup." So, I hope eventually you can incorporate it,
I do
that kind of
too.
stuff.
So, yeah, thanks.
Do you have
Any support for localization or any of this translation to different languages that you can put in the PowerPivot itself?
No. So the question is if we had any translations and localizations. We have in analysis services, we have metadata translations. It was on our radar. We didn't get to it in this release. We will for sure get to it, but it won't be now. That was also a feature that we want to get to it because we have it in analysis services, so we want to make sure the two storage modes get on par. But the request wasn't that high. For a lot of the European customers, they even start using they even use English, Excel, etc. So we think it's important. We do want to get to it. We didn't get to it, but it's still on the radar. Any other questions?
With the values such as elevation and depth that have, they're basically float values. I'm wondering if there isn't a function or a planned function to make it really easy to create multiple histogram groups. Like you could say, I want to take the range of values that are present and break those into 6 even groups. Or, something that would make it less mathematically intensive to create the groups beforehand.
I'm actually wondering if you already have a function for that.
I was looking. I couldn't see something obvious anyway, but
No.
it would be nice if it could take the range and just kind of go,
Yeah. If you
chalk
want
it up like that.
if you want to drop me an email afterwards, I'll go and figure out, and I can get back to you. We may actually have the DAX. There's so many functions in there that, and we may have done it for the next release. I don't know. So if you want to know for sure, I'm happy to follow up and get back to you.
Other questions?
So I think just looking at this, like I predominantly, apart from the diagram, showed you the V1 of it, which is a version we did in an extremely short time frame. So if you're looking forward, since you're on the NDA, what we are really looking is start enriching that tool set. So there's a lot of things like sort by other columns that you may or may not experience that you can't do today. So for example, if you do month name, etc., you want them to sort naturally. Support for user-defined hierarchies. Instead of dragging year and month and day, you can define the hierarchies in the model, right-click 3 controls, say create hierarchy, we create it on the fly, and the users now only have to create just a time hierarchy. So there's a lot of those kind of investments that will go into the next release, of making it a richer model. So we'll keep investing in building out with more and more features. So all this kind of feedback, all the questions, if you come up with one on your way home, Julie Strauss at Microsoft.com, send them. We'll love to hear the voices, the feedback, help us prioritize what we need to go do. Data cleaning is in there.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like they don't think this is important. They haven't heard from you.
From you, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Any more questions?
No,
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
thank you.